well that's out here for drinking water?
With the bucket deal.
Yes.
Oh yeah, we used to get water out of it.
So we were wondering when it went dry. Is
Okay.
the sound doing good
Yep,
now?
sounds good.
Okay, well, Harvey, let's start with you telling us your name and your birth date and your earliest time that you would have come to Dudley Farm, the first year that you might have been here.
I have to think about that.
Yes, that's probably true. But if you give us your name and your birth date and your relationship to the Dudley family.
Should I say my name is so-and-so or just go to my name?
Yes, start with the whole sentence. My name is,
All right.
if you will.
My name is Philip Harvey Garland. I was born April the 4th, 1919.
And your relationship to the Dudley family would be,
Grandchild.
so you would say I was the grandchild,
Right.
if you will.
I was the grandchild.
And that would be of Philip Benjamin Harvey Dudley.
Right, of all the boys and all the girls.
All right. Tell us a little bit about your mother and who she was in relation to the Dudley family.
Well, my mother stayed on the farm for an awful long time, and she taught school in Gainesville. And I don't know when she came back to the farm, and I don't know when they came to Jacksonville, because I wasn't here. But I would have liked to seen her teaching school, because she was pretty strict.
And as a young woman, then she taught school until she married your father.
Yes.
And would you tell us about him and his occupation?
Well, he was basically a farmer.
Could you say my father?
Oh, I'm sorry. My father was basically a farmer, although he had a meat market at one time. And when they came to Jacksonville, they started farming again. Wait just a minute. Did you want, if I gave the name of the streets, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Yeah, everything that you remember.
All right. When my mother and father came to Jacksonville, they rented property on Commonwealth in Macduff, and was a two-story home. And I know it growing up that I was upstairs again. Had a tin roof, similar to this. I enjoyed it very much, but I didn't enjoy going to school. My father would be plowing on the field, and they had a little stream that went through that property. So mother would give me my lunch, and I'd head towards school, and I'd stop off in the woods there, and my father would be plowing, and he would come within 15 or 20 feet of me, and I'm seeing him out there working, and I'm eating my lunch or just doing nothing. And in the afternoon, when I could hear the kids coming home from school, I'd get out in the road and walk home with them. So my folks thought I was at school until my mother went over there one day to some kind of meeting and found out I had not been attending. So the next day she'd taken me to school. And I went in and asked her to use the bathroom. And I went in the front door of the bathroom, and I went out the back, and I went back to where I had been staying in the woods. So when my mother found out about this, there was a store right across the street. So she took me to school the next day and waited on me. And pretty soon I went out that back door and started up the street, and that was the last time I did that, because she got some little spankings on me. And I never did it again, and I finally really enjoyed the school, and ended up being, when they started the school board patrol, they named me captain to start off with. And why they did it, I don't know, because I wasn't that good.
And so, in trying to figure out time frames, and dates are hard to come by going way back, but I would wonder if you could tell us your first year memory of visiting Dudley Farm by figuring out how your birth date and then how old you were when you first came here. And then we'd have a year to categorize this, what we're talking about.
You ready? Well, as I said, I was born in 1919, and I'm sure I was 5 years old when I first came over to Dudley Farm, because they wouldn't let me do anything. I was always in their way. And as time went on, a couple of years, they put me to work. And
tell us your childhood memories of some of those things that were special, the summer visits, and would you tell us when that it was a summer visit when you came, and how long you stayed?
I used to come over in the summertime, and when school was out, I would come over here and work, help bring in the watermelons and help hang the tobacco and everything. That maybe I must have been about 11 years old then, that when I was doing that. And my favorite aunt was Aunt Winnie, and she was the lady that handled all the chickens and the eggs, and so in the afternoons I would help her do that. And it was kind of a job too, because they had an awful lot of chickens.
How many would you think they had by that time?
Oh, they had hundreds. They had hundreds of chickens, and they had, of course they had a lot of eggs too. But I enjoyed that very much, and as I say, Aunt Winnie was my favorite person.
And why would that be compared to the others?
Well, she was more willing to work with you, you know, take up. She had patience, and some of the other ones didn't have patience. So I really enjoyed her.
Especially with younger children.
Oh yes, oh
Would
yes.
you tell us, were you here with other children? Or by
No, I was always by myself, and but I went around with Major, the black fellow that worked on the farm, and we'd go out and gather watermelons and come in with a load of watermelons. And of course at that time watermelons didn't cost much at the store, but Major would take them. It'd be hot out there, so he'd take them and get to the side of the wagon and just bust them, and we'd eat the heart out. And it was just something new to me, and something I got to the point that I look forward to.
Tell us about Major a little bit. We've seen a picture of him, but what did he look like, and what was he like as a person? If you
Well, he was a very straight.
Did you say Major was?
Major was a very straight-laced fella. He was all business. And see, I never knew that he was in charge of the people, but it always seemed to me that they looked up to him, and they kind of paid attention to what he said. He had a very booming voice, and he was just an individual. If he was in a crowd, he stood up real erect. You'd have to notice it, and he always seemed to take up for whoever was in trouble amongst the people that were here or wherever it was. So he and I became very close. In fact, that's the first black person that I ever spent any time with. And I learned things from Major that I think about today.
tell us if you think of something, anything you would have learned specifically to the farm, or
Well, the one thing that I did learn about driving the horses, I mean, you know, he taught me how to he and haw and what they meant. Just so many things that he worked with me on. And I'd go out and help him pick beans and peas and things like that on the farm.
so tell us, was it still then mule or horse and wagon?
It was
before tractors?
all way before tractors. In fact, I never saw a tractor back at that time. All we had was horses and mules.
So all the harvesting of the watermelons was with mules and wagons?
Back at that time, yes.
What I know you told me about varieties of watermelons, and there was a particular color that was interesting.
The yellow watermelon. I was interested in the yellow watermelon that they raised, and it didn't seem to be as sweet as the other watermelons because it didn't look like a watermelon. It looked like something else. And they raised cantaloupes and just everything on the farm, eggplants, cucumbers, or whatever it might be, they lived off the farm.
Tell us the scale of that farming compared to a small garden, vegetable garden, or a crop field. Give us an idea of scale of what they grew, if you would.
The farm that I worked on with them was a large farm, much bigger than a garden or anything like that. And they always had the helpers that came in and worked right next to one another. And they'd work from morning until late afternoon. But the big thing about it is everybody had a big breakfast. And then they came in at lunchtime and they had a big lunch. And dinner was the same thing. They had 3 big meals a day. They worked hard, but they ate hard also.
Yes. And do you remember who would be cooking that meal generally?
Back at that time, Aunt Dora was the main cook. Of course, the other girls chipped in and helped her, but she was responsible. Aunt Myrtle and Aunt Winnie worked out on the farm a good bit. And Edna taught school, so she was not here. So Aunt Dora was in the kitchen all the time preparing the food.
And you considered, would you consider her a good cook? You know, tell us what you might have eaten specifically were your favorite things.
My Aunt Dora was a great cook, and the one thing that she helped prepare wasn't vegetables, it was sausage. And she'd make them in a little round ball, and then they'd put them in a jar and put them in the smokehouse for a period of time. And then when you got them out and ate them, they were fantastic.
So they would be...
Be careful of going.
Oh, are you doing it? Oh, sorry. And would it be canned, considered canned sausage, is what?
They had, we ate canned sausage that they canned, and we ate sausage that they put in jars. So it was, and they had the string sausage, they had that too. But everything was delicious.
They cooked a lot of fresh vegetables from the garden. What else was the food that you would expect, say, at a noon meal? Or?
The food that we had at each meal was different. The noon meal would be a lot of vegetables and a lot of meat also. But dinner was the main course where you had a lot of meat. Then you come back in and had biscuits and cornbread for dinner. So it was a great time for me.
Tell about the wash water that you had to be careful in going by the kitchen.
They didn't have wash places at that time set up for any particular space, and when they got through washing the dishes or washing clothes and stuff, especially the dishwater, they just throw it out in the yard. You had to be sure you wouldn't stand in there at that spot. But you always had to watch out for Aunt Dora. She had a fast hand on that.
Another childhood memory, we talked about a little bit when you went upstairs sleeping. Would you tell us what it would be like staying here in this house with your aunts and uncles?
I always enjoyed coming over to the farm because the aunts and the uncles, everybody got along good, and they treated me great, although I still say Aunt Winnie was a favorite, and I enjoyed being with them. They just felt like they were my own mother and father when I was here. And I lost...
What was it like upstairs, sleeping upstairs?
The one thing that I didn't like over at the farm, they had a big bedroom upstairs, had 3 beds in it, and I'd always get into the center one, and of course they had another bedroom up there that there wasn't anyone in. And the first night, every time I came, I'd lay in that bed, cry for my mother. But I soon got over that, and even later on, though, when I came back over, that first night was a hard night for me being away from home.
when you got used to it and you could see out the windows, and was it hot sleeping there in the summertime? What were your impressions?
I always enjoyed sleeping upstairs because it was the most cool, a lot cooler than downstairs, or it seemed to be for me. And open the windows, you didn't have to worry about anything. You were buddy coming in the window, you were upstairs, so it was really, for me, it was fantastic, really.
Do you remember the old road out there in front of the house being used, or was there still the activity on the road by the farmhouse? Could you tell us about the travel in the area?
The location of the farm was not on a direct road. It was on roads leading up to it, dirt roads. And there was one road that went right in front of the farm, went down, someone told me one time it went all the way to St. Augustine. I'm not sure about that, but I know the mailman went down that way. And there was a few people that lived down that way. But you never did see an awful lot of cars. And at nighttime, you never heard or saw one.
We talked about Majorhurst, and there's been some questions about where the hired help or the tenants lived in relation to Dudley Farm. After slavery days, they weren't living on the property, we understand, but can you give us a general idea of where Majorhurst lived, and Aunt Becky and any of the hired help?
When I would come over to the farm, a lot of times I would go out with Major to where his family was. And I always thought that the little houses were on the farm, and I still believe that they were. They may not have been, but they had their own separate little homes out on the perimeter. And Major was kind of the mayor out there. I mean, he taken care of everything and kept people in line. He was a great person.
And what about, tell us about Aunt Becky as a child. She must have been a somewhat formidable character too. Do you remember Aunt Becky, the black woman who was a nanny, I believe?
I don't remember.
Becky Perkins. She, I think she helped in the household with birthing the children, so maybe she wasn't alive anymore when you were here.
I don't think she was. I don't remember her.
Well, then Major would have lived, as we're looking out to the crops in the front yard, our crop field, would he have lived off in that direction? Can you tell us where, just a kind of a directional, where the houses were?
Well, I always thought he lived towards the back. Now, you know, being a kid at that time, I didn't pay too much directions, but I don't remember coming up front with him or leaving front with him to go to his home.
And you said Major was in charge of the other workers. Give us an idea of how many workers there were. And
they had an awful lot of workers on the farm, and it seemed to me that Major was probably in charge of them, but I never heard anyone. No one told me that. I just got that feeling by the actions and the way things were going.
People ask us, were there 3 hired help or 20, or, you know, can you give us a figure on that?
There were a lot of people used at the farm. That sometimes it would only be 3 or 4, and then at different times you'd have 12 or 15 people maybe working based on what the crop was in at that particular time.
I'm glad to hear that answer, because that's what we've been saying. We're wondering if that was accurate. Another area of the farm that you mentioned was the tobacco. Could you tell us some about what you actually did and where the tobacco was grown?
Well, a lot of the tobacco that was grown on the farm was over the Hale place, they called it. There's a piece of acreage not far from the main home. And I would go over in the summertime and help them with the tobacco, but my main deal was hanging the tobacco. In other words, they'd take it and string it and put it on the sticks and I'd put them in the tobacco barn. And there was a lot of the black help at that time that worked and brought and helped string tobacco. In fact, I remember going back to Major again now, that I saw him one day, the bugs were just everywhere, and he'd taken kerosene and rubbed it on his face to keep the bugs from biting him. But it's just, if you hadn't lived that, you would never thought about it really.
Oh, this is wonderful. I guess the first crop that you talked about was cotton. Tell us a memory or what you remember about cotton here, if you would.
When I first started coming over, I remember coming over to the farm, their main crop was cotton. And I was so small, I didn't get involved too much in the cotton. But I would go out with them and watch them, how they picked it and things like that. And then they went from cotton to watermelons, and they did that a number of years. And then the prices got so low on that, they moved to tobacco, and they did real well with the tobacco. And that's the last thing I remember them having as far as a crop concerned.
Well, that's good. That gives us quite a diversity of the crops that were here. And you mentioned gourds being around the farm somewhere. Tell us what the back porch looked like and where the gourds were, if you would.
I always liked to come over and look under the back porch, because every time I came it would seem like they would have some new gourds, because you could look under there. It was like a house or something, but the gourds were everywhere. And I don't really know where they got them all from, but I know we used them to drink out of. I mean, that was our cups. And there were different colors, but I mean, I don't know what caused it to be different colors, but most of them were the brown.
And so they were used for drinking and possibly other
Right.
utensils. Do you remember any birdhouse gourds? The big round ones for hanging for birdhouses?
See those?
Yeah. One lady said she remembered pumpkins under the house, so I suppose they could store any kind of...
Oh yeah, they had, in addition to the gourds under the house, they had pumpkins under there also.
And that would be under the back porch.
Under the back porch.
Tell us how the back porch looked, because I think you talked about it being cluttered.
When you came to the farm and went around back and saw the back porch, it was used an awful lot, and it looked like it had been used an awful lot, but somebody was always back there rocking. If it was nighttime or daytime or whatever, there'd be at least one person back there. And everybody spent a lot of time out there talking and resting when they come in from the fields. They had water basin up there that you could wash with, but you had to go out to the well and get the water and bring it in the beginning, and then later on they had the regular plumbing put in so that they did have water.
And I thought it was unique, you mentioning that the men and women had separate wash areas. Would you tell us that?
Also on the back porch where the watering, the ladies and the men washed their hands, whatever they were doing at that particular time, there was the men had one end of the porch and the women had the other end of the porch. They never used the same utensils or anything like that.
Quite unique. And some other plants I remember you mentioned pomegranates. That's an unusual plant. And tell us what your impression of them were and where they were located, and did they use them?
I used to come over in the summertime, and the first thing I went for was the pomegranates. The grapes were my favorite, but the grapes were not in when I would first get here. But pomegranates, they had some huge trees. I don't see all of them here now. But I know at that time they had some huge, and when you saw the fruit on them, they looked that much better.
And did you eat them just as is? Did they have other uses for them? What did they?
I know they do something else with pomegranates, or they did something else with them, but the only thing that I ever did was eat them. I never had them any other way.
Describe the fruit to us and what it looked like. A lot of people don't even know what a pomegranate is.
Well, it was a thick skin fruit, and most of the time the skin was kind of pinkish. And in the inside they had the little seeds that were pink. And you could just eat this. A lot of people really enjoyed them, and a lot of people didn't like them at all, but I thought they were great.
And after the pomegranates then were done, and later in the summer, you went to the grape arbors.
When we got through eating the pomegranates, we went and started picking grapes, and they had I'm not sure, I didn't remember, but I think they had about 5 orchards of grapes on the property, and we just went from one. Some of them were black, and then some of them were the tan variety.
Do you remember what they have made with something we wondered what they did with the grapes besides eating fresh? Was there preserves, jellies, or drinks maybe?
And they use the grapes for a lot of reasons. They use the skin to make some, they put that in the jam a good bit, I think is what it was. But they did make jelly and jam. They put it to good use.
And they were delicious just eating straight.
They were delicious whenever we got them.
Yeah.
Another thing that I enjoyed is when the cane came in, and they had the grinding of the cane. That was a big occasion, and see the horse or mule at that particular time walking around in circles, making that happen. And the cane juice was delicious, and then they used that to go on and make the syrup, which was also delicious.
And as a child, what was your role in that day? What would you be?
Well, it was more or less a playful day for me, because at sometimes you get a chance to go get a hold of the horse or the mule and walk around with him or ride him while he was going around in the circles.
And was there ever candy involved with the syrup making? Did you get to taste the?
What is that scum? Is that the candy?
Yes, they call it polecat or lip lap.
I don't know what it is. They made a lot of things out of the cane, other than the syrup, and something that was kind of sticky and candy-like. I don't know what they called it, but it was delicious, and everybody seemed to enjoy it, but the kids loved it.
It would be the best part of the
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hang on a second, I'm going to change tapes.
The memories of my grandmother wasn't that good. They came, I'll tell this later, but I'll tell you now, they came over to Jacksonville to visit with us, and we were getting ready to go to town or something, and I was really cutting up because my mother was trying to dress me and everything, and Fanny, as they called her, she said, I wouldn't put up with that for 1 minute. And she said, spank him. So I didn't care too much for her.
And so in a bigger general picture, would you say that there was a very strictness with the family way of, with their within the family of your mother and her siblings? And tell us what your impression would be now of how the family was as a unit. And then
I think back a lot about the family over in Gainesville, comparing them with what goes on today. My aunts and uncles and my mother and father, everybody was strict. I mean, you did your work, you went to school, you did your homework, you went to bed, and Saturday you take the bath. But really, every person over at the farm Ralph was all business. I mean, he didn't hunt, he didn't fish that I remember. Uncle Frank was, he liked to hunt, liked to fish, and he was a little more active than Uncle Ralph. And Uncle Harvey didn't particularly stay at the farm. He was a railway mail clerk, and he lived in Jacksonville. And Uncle Norman lived on a piece of the property with his wife for a period of time. And then they moved to St. Augustine, Florida, I believe it was. Aunt Edna, pleasant lady, but she wasn't easy to know. She was a teacher and really well educated. And it seemed to me that she kind of stood away from the other ones because they didn't want to ask her too many things because she always was really right straight down the middle. But Aunt Myrtle was sweet as she could be. And I've always said when I think about Aunt Winnie, I thought she was the greatest. And Aunt Dora, she had to be one of the greats. She was the cook. But all of them had pretty good dispositions. I don't ever remember any quarrels or anything amongst themselves. But I was just thinking that the kids today couldn't survive on that type of treatment, or they wouldn't survive, really. But I never did hear any fussing going on as far as the family was concerned.
And Dolly would have been the oldest. Would you have known her? Do you have a memory of Dolly?
Aunt Dolly, I did not know.
Already married.
Yeah,
gone.
I didn't know Aunt Dolly. And there's another aunt that lived in Canada, Edith, I think it was. And I never had a chance to meet her.
And Laura was the one who died of appendicitis. Did you remember her before her death? She was gone.
And your grandfather was already gone?
Mm-hmm.
The year before you were born, I guess. Then Dudley died.
Mm-hmm.
As in the community, did you have a sense of how other people in the community would have looked at the Dudleys? Were they considered prominent, middle-class farmers? Where was their position in the community, and what did people think of them, do you think?
When I visited, and they had visitors come to visit with the home folks, it seemed to me like everybody loved them because they just praised them. I mean, well, who did this and who did that. And I'm sure that I don't know how prominent they were, but I'm sure they were very prominent in the area because people seemed to me like to know them and like to be with them.
I noticed in the photos they never smiled. Would you consider that that the farm life wasn't easy, or the life wasn't easy, or were they a dour? How were they with their sense of humor or laughter? Did you?
There wasn't an awful lot of laughing going on at the farm because it seemed like a business operation to me. I'm thinking back now. I know when I was there when I was small, but there was not a lot of laughing going on. It was work, and that was about it.
That's what Myrtle told me when I asked her what they did for leisure.
Yeah.
Yeah, was there any fun things at all in any leisure time, or it was?
Off the record, I don't remember them having any leisure time. They might go. Some of the boys would go fishing or hunting, but as far as going to a ball game and stuff like that you do today, I didn't know anything about that.
It was so labor intensive.
Right. It was just thinking what I'm going to do today. I got so much to do.
And I suppose that some of the things, the cane grindings, the corn shuckings, even the tobacco harvest, there was some social. Would you comment on that? Would it have been a social gathering, and there would have, in that sense, been some sort of fun? Again, was it work?
I don't remember it. I really don't.
Yeah. So
I can remember people coming over in their old trucks and putting their foot up, getting out and talking, and then they'd come and go to bed, the ones that didn't go home. So, but it wasn't any like socializing. There was no drinking or anything like that going on.
yeah, very much taking care of the work of the
Right.
farm.
Of course, there was a lot of things that went on at the farm that I never saw, or because of when I went to work, graduated from school and went to work, it was very seldom that I ever got back over to the farm again. It was a rare occasion when that happened. I enjoyed it, but I just didn't have time.
Tell us about your life work then. We'd like to know.
Well, I enjoyed the work that I did. I didn't care too much for farming, although I did part of that with the home people and also with my father. But I got a job as a usher in a theater in Jacksonville, Florida.
What
So
theater would that be?
started at the Imperial Theater in Jacksonville, and I would catch a ride home from school and go to work at 1 o'clock and work until 11:30. And then get up in the morning and go to school. But I made 35 cents an hour. And when I first started, I had to come down and wait and see if they opened the balcony, because I worked in the balcony. If they didn't open the balcony, I didn't get paid. So I didn't care too much for that. But later on, I got the job as a doorman, and I got a job as a popcorn boy, and then usher, and then I became a doorman, assistant manager, and then I got to be a manager, and then I got to be a film booker, and then after that, the film buyer, and then after that, they promoted me to be in charge of the state of Florida. I was president of the Florida Circuit. And after that, I became president of the whole United States as far as ABC was concerned. ABC was the American Broadcasting Company, owned all the theaters. So I just came up through the ranks from them. I started out as an usher and ended up as president of the company.
How exciting. That's a wonderful story. And you've been retired now?
26 years. I retired in 1959.
Well, compared to that, tell us the simple pleasure of the ice cream out here, in quotes, ice cream, and what happened with butter and milk.
On the farm, there wasn't too many ice cream parlors around, and of course it wasn't ice cream, but at that time they told me that's what they called it. But to me it looked like clabber, and hang it up in a sock or something for a few days and put some sugar in it, and that was our dessert.
And it tasted?
Well, you know, my wife today says, I like cottage cheese. And she said, how can you eat that stuff, you know, really?
And that's what it was.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Well, you know, a lot of people today don't know how milk is made into butter or cottage cheese. But did you see it in the little dairy house? Did you see how they set it up? Or did you help with milking the cow or carrying milk? How did it all happen?
Well, the only thing I could remember about helping them much as far as eating was, it's when they were baking the butter, you know, they'd have be going up and down or whatever that was. But I didn't get too much in that. And I didn't get a chance. I wanted to, but they wouldn't let me help them work in the make soap.
So you got to watch it.
Yeah.
As a young boy, that wasn't your job.
I enjoyed watching them, and I wanted to help them, but they wouldn't let me.
Do you think of any other memories of the early days on the farm before your time? Any stories that were told about things that happened that go way back?
You know, I tell you the truth, I can't.
I'd say you've gone pretty far back as we're talking now,
Yeah.
more than most people's
Well,
life.
see, I never did. I never did see my grandfather. And we didn't, back at that time, we didn't get a chance to come over that often, so I'm kind of a blank when you get.
Did you ever hear any stories about him? Did the family ever talk about him?
I don't know.
Yeah. Did they ever talk about your great-grandparents at all? Do you ever hear any stories about your great-grandparents?
Mm-mm.
It's interesting how I know with my father's generation, he knew nothing about his grandparents hardly, and there wasn't that interest in genealogy like there is today. You know, in the family story, you just lived on and went on with your business.
Well, you know, back at that time, kids wasn't a part of people talking about, you know, I mean, the kids were one thing, and I just never heard any serious conversation about family
It is an interesting
back
fact,
at that
isn't it?
time.
So if the grown-ups were talking, tell us what happened with the children. You weren't allowed to be in there, or what was?
When the grown folks were talking over at the farm, it was like being in church. It was quiet, and it was very peaceful. And if one of the children started giving any trouble, they were taken out. I mean, they wasn't allowed to mess up the meeting.
And they could go outside and play, or they could be outside, whatever they were out of the way.
They would go outside and play, and there was quite a few kids around at that time, so they didn't have any problem of taking care of themselves.
Do you remember any of the, I guess by the time you were here, the old store building had been moved into the complex. But I know Miss Myrtle said as a child she used to play out where the store used to be. Was that an area where the children would?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that.
Playing. Your playing was just around about the farm and
Right.
with the animals and
I spent most of my time with the help, you know.
with the hired help.
Yeah.
What were those people like?
Excuse me. They had a lot of people they had to hire to work on the farm. And I never did hear much bickering amongst them. They seemed to be more businesslike than my family was even. In other words, it was kind of like they were knew what they were supposed to do, and they did it, and that was the end of it. There was no conversation about it.
Well, I wondered, did the women, this would be black women, help? What was their role and specific? Could you give us specific tasks that they did to help out on the farm? What was their work? And same with the men.
I'm really not too familiar with what each individual did, but I know that everybody, the women and the men, helped strip the tobacco and work in tobacco, whether it was packing it or taking it to town or whatever.
And would the women work with the laundry, or was that something just the Dudley women did? Do you know about the laundry?
I don't remember that.
Again, that was women's work, and so probably weren't allowed over there doing the soap or the laundry.
And you said that you spent a lot of time with the hired help, and why was that? And what kind of things did you do with those people?
Well, I used to enjoy spending time with the hired help, and it wasn't so much of what I did, but I mean, it just seems to me that I liked to be with them because they were friendly. In fact, they would give me more time than my aunts and uncles were at certain times.
So you could tag along
Right.
with them as they were stringing tobacco or working in the field.
Right.
Mostly out in jobs having to do with crops.
The most things I can remember about planting anything or working over there was in the garden that they had close to the house. I mean, we did quite a bit of that, but that was just the regular cucumbers and tomatoes and stuff like that.
Do you remember any, I know Major Hurst was a prominent figure as the hired help. Are there any other names that would come back to?
I don't know, not one.
Didn't know them by name as much as by companionship.
No, I didn't know.
Yeah.
What about any of their children? Did you play with their children?
I don't remember that. I don't think I did.
Yeah. Seemed like a good bit of the time you were the only child on the farm.
Oh yeah, there was no children here when I came over. I don't know why, but there wasn't.
Would neighborhood children come over so you'd have some companionship?
Mm-mm.
You'd have to be with the adults.
No, it was strictly more adult, really.
Now, a few minutes ago, you said that there were children around to play with. Was that a special time that there would be other children here? Because most of the time it was just you.
Tell me that again.
Well, a few minutes ago, you mentioned that when the adults would be sitting around and talking and having a serious talk, and if the kids would disrupt that you would be sent outside, and you said that there would be children to play with.
Well, basically what I was speaking of is the children that were here in the family.
When they were children.
When they were children.
Yeah,
Okay.
that makes sense.
Okay.
When they were younger than as your aunts and uncles.
Right.
So you were really mostly the only niece or nephew that would come and stay at the
Right.
farm, and you would
Although
stay.
I remember one time that they had a meeting at the home. And there was a bunch of the children that were brought by the people who were at the meeting, and a little boy kept causing trouble, and Dad taken him right away and didn't come back to the meeting. He went home. That was the end of that. I mean, I think the kids just knew that they couldn't get away with anything.
How were they disciplined? How were you disciplined if you did something wrong? What would they do?
When I was growing up, I got my share of peach tree switches, and in fact, one time on the farm, my father got mad at me about something, and he tried to catch me, and he couldn't catch me, so he had a bridle in his hand, and he hit me with the bridle.
The peach switch was the hand.
Yeah, my mother used that.
Now, when you came here, were your parents coming here as well, or they just like? send you
No,
here
my
for
mother
the
would come, but.
You'd like come for the summer or something.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to ask about his parents at all? We haven't really asked about them.
Sure, if you have memories, you described your mother some, but your father as well as a farmer. You have other memories about them as a couple or as your parents?
My parents were real strict mom and pops. My father was a good bit older than my mother, and In fact, I would get up to go to school and have breakfast.
Hang on a second. Got people talking. Okay.
Our family was a very close-knit family. When you live on a farm, you're not really, there's so much acreage around you that you don't have a neighbor living next door to you or anything like that. And I used to come home from school, and I don't ever remember bringing someone home from school to play. You didn't come home to play, you came home to work. But my father never asked me to do an awful lot, but I mean, he did expect me to come home and work in the afternoons. And he and my mother got along real, real good. She was an excellent cook, and I'm sure he's one of the hardest working men that I'll ever see, because I'd get up to go to school in the mornings, and we'd have breakfast together. And he'd already been out on the farm and gone to market with the vegetables and things and come back home. And he worked right on up until dark. And I remember his favorite medicine was black magnesia. Not too many people probably have heard about that today, but there was black magnesia, and he had a knife, and he just cut off a piece, and that was his medicine. And the other one was black draught, which was the most horrible tasting stuff I ever had. But it would mix that and drink it.
Would they cure things?
Yes, it was good. I mean, as far as curing things, but I mean, it just tastes horrible. The magnesia wasn't so bad, but the other stuff was terrible.
Well, we might just in closing ask you what you think of Myrtle's donation of the farm to the Park Service, and what your hopes would be to see with the farm, or what your opinion is of how it is and it could be.
I was really excited when I heard that Aunt Myrtle wanted to put the farm in a position of being used in the future for the younger people. I think she talked to all of us about it. I know she talked to me. And I certainly didn't have any objections to it. I just kind of looked forward to see what was going to happen. And I can honestly say I just think it's been fantastic so far. There's a lot of things yet to be done. But the people working over there is just, I've been excited every time I get back over there to see what's going on. And I just hope that my kids, grandkids coming on will have a chance to come over and visit and see what happened.
Chance to see the history carried on.
Right.
Is there maybe one particular thing that you think would be important for people of today to learn about the way of life of your growing up and of your family? Is there something that would be important for people to learn?
When I talk to the young people today, when you start talking about, if we talk about things of our childhood, they're not interested because they have never experienced it. And I think that's one of the worst things that could happen to them, because I think any child growing up on a farm would learn things that's going to help him all of his life, not just part of it, but all of it. And it needs to be more of that now.
What is something that you learned in your life spending time on this farm?
I think the farm helped me to learn how not completely get along with people, but learn how to try to get along with people, because when I came over, everybody was strangers to me, the white people and the black people. And I just found out that if I didn't talk too much and ask too many questions, that I got along a lot better. My wife always says to me, why don't you talk a lot? And I said, well, I don't have a lot to say. But the big thing I would tell her is that I used to get paid for talking. And nobody's paying me now. I ain't talking.
Did you learn a lot about hard work and the importance of hard work?
I'll tell you one thing about a farm. It is a great learning bit from the standpoint of starting out working. Because when you're on a farm, you get brought into it gradually. You grow up on a farm. You start out as a child, and you just learn every day something different. And when you get up in life, those memories and how you handle things back at that time are very helpful to you. You may not think so at that time, but when I stop and think, what was my position with such a area, it comes to you.
We might compare it as a work ethic. The
Right.
children of today, just like the lacking of discipline, they don't learn the value of work with their hands or the ability to raise their own food. Do you think that's in the modern world today, people don't have that connection with where their food comes from, or working to see a product? Is that have we lost something because of that, or is it?
Well, I think one of the biggest things, as far as a farm and a person being raised on it, is that they learn so much about food, as what they should eat and not eat. They learn that they're supposed to get their rest. They learn that they're supposed to mind their parents when they speak to them. A lot of that doesn't go on today, but those kids haven't had a chance on the farm to learn it.
And that's the value of those early days, perhaps. We'd hope we could pass that on to them through this farm, learning where their food comes from, learning the values.
Well, I think the idea of what Aunt Myrtle had in mind is being carried out every day. And I think you're getting the young people back from school. You're trying to make up some time and help the ones that haven't had a chance at this. And some are really interested in it.
Yeah, anything else that you can think of? Any memory of anything that you wanted to share with us?
We've gone back through a lot of time.
No, I just would like to have a chance to do it all over again.